Shio, and Shki. Thank you for tuning in to the second event of our Celebrating Sequoyah series, which honors the bicentennial of the Cherokee Syllabary, invented by Native American genius and visionary Sequoyah. The series is sponsored by the Gadugi Partnership, Appalachian State University's Honors College, and our friends at the Chieftain Museum and Major Ridge Home. Our second speaker is Mr. Kachi Tiger, Cherokee language teacher at Cherokee High School on the Qualla boundary. Mr. Tiger shares with us his experiences teaching the language, as well as his hopes for preserving and passing down Cherokee. His words are inspiring, thoughtful, and incredibly useful for any current or future teacher. Please join us live on November the 10th for our final speaker, Cherokee Elder Mr. James Standing Deer. Now, enjoy Mr. Tiger. Shki. We can get this up just in case. But rather than just taking classes that are already offered here at App State, what we've done is each of the three classes is actually designed specifically for Cherokee High School students. So each class is on Cherokee history or Cherokee culture. This semester, the class is called Education and the Eastern Band. And what we do is we look at the history of Cherokee education and the history of Cherokee schools, going from the missionaries through to the boarding school era and eventually into the modern era. And the second class is Cherokee culture and leadership. And then the third class is the Cherokee Nation during removal. So it's a really great partnership. I love being a part of this. We're in our 9th year now. So we've been at this for a while, and it just gets stronger, I think, each year. Tonight's event is co-sponsored by obviously the Gadugi Partnership, but also App State's Honors College. And our third partner is the Chieftains Museum / Major Ridge Home down in Rome, Georgia, which is the former home of the Cherokee headman, Major Ridge. And it's been preserved and you can now visit it. They have a terrific museum there, and you can sort of feel the environment that was there during removal and see some of the old artifacts. So we really appreciate having these folks partner with us, and obviously Cherokee Central Schools partnering with us as well. Just a quick advertisement, I guess. Just wanted to let everyone know, I'll put this over here in the chat. On November the 10th will be our final speaker, and that is Mr. James Standing Deer will be joining us to talk about his lifelong work in preserving the language, how he came to care about this work, how he came to be passionate about the work, and sort of set us up for our celebration of Native American History Month. It'll be 7 o'clock as well, and we'll also be doing that on Zoom. So if you have a chance to join us on November the 10th, love to have you. Mr. Standing Deer is a terrific speaker, really inspirational person. So hopefully we will see you all then. So tonight, what we're doing is this is our second speaker in the Celebrating Sequoyah series. And we're doing this because this year is actually the bicentennial, the 200th anniversary of Sequoyah's invention of the Cherokee Syllabary. And for those of you who might not be aware of what a syllabary is, that's the written version of the Cherokee language. And what Sequoyah did is in many ways unheard of in human history. It normally takes hundreds, sometimes even thousands of years for a written language to develop. Sequoyah did it in less than 2 decades and brought it to the National Council. It was quickly adopted, and it's really made a tremendous difference in the ability to hold on to the Cherokee language. It's the bicentennial of his work, but during that 200 years, there's also been a really concerted effort at cultural genocide from the part of the United States government. In this semester's class at Cherokee High School, when we talk about the missionaries, we read some of their diaries and we read some of their letters to one another. And we see them just flat out say that part of their work is to erase the Cherokee language. One missionary in particular was named John Gambold. And Gambold writes several letters where he says that he believes he has been called to wipe out the Cherokee language. And he believes that that's what God wants him to do. He's in charge of one of the largest boarding schools in the Cherokee Nation from 1805 until his death in the late 1820s. So it's 20 years of missionaries and then eventually government boarding schools trying to erase the language. For those of you who are my students, you've heard me tell the story of my grandpa and how in third grade down in Cramerton, North Carolina, he made the mistake of speaking one word of Cherokee. And when he did, the teacher took him out of the classroom and washed his mouth out with a cake of lye soap. And that was one word. He didn't say a full sentence. He just got the one word out. So we're celebrating resilience, we're celebrating power, and we're celebrating dedication. If you got to hear Ayla last month as she spoke to us in her talk about how she felt called to be a part of this work to preserve the language. So that's what we're about during this semester's speaker series, is celebrating Sequoyah's work while also reminding ourselves of the work we still have to do and the commitment that we still have to bring to this work to make sure that the language not just survives, but that the language thrives. And so with that in mind, I am just super excited and incredibly honored for tonight's speaker. Tonight's speaker is Mr. Catcuce Tiger, and Mr. Tiger is the Cherokee language instructor at Cherokee High School. So he is very much on the front lines of the effort to make sure that this language perseveres and that this language gets passed to the next generation. I've had the good fortune of teaching some of the same students that Mr. Tiger has, and I've heard just tremendous stories about Mr. Tiger and really positive things from the high school kids who get to work with him. And so we are the Gadugi Partnership, Honors College, the Chieftains Museum, just incredibly, incredibly honored that he was willing and able to join us on this Indigenous Peoples Day celebration. So what I will do is I will turn the program over to Mr. Tiger, and you folks, if you have questions, we will definitely have a time for questions and answers. You can also please feel free to place questions in the chat. That worked out really well last time. So if you have a question or a comment, please feel free to put that here in the chat. So that's enough from me. And what I will do again is turn this over to Mr. Tiger. And again, Mr. Tiger, thank you, Shki, for being here with us and for sharing your gifts and your story. We really appreciate it.
Shield God, that's your Danny Laga, Otali Helaga, Zizaido, Galiliga Zigaidoha, Oske Shastigo Shanoi. Hello, everyone. My name is Catcuce Tiger. I'd just like to say welcome. I usually greet people when they come into my classroom, but I'm greeting you all in this virtual classroom the same way I usually do with my kids. And I had just said that I'm glad you all are here. And also, I'm glad to be here myself. Just like Dr. Bryant said, at any time, if I say something you may not understand or I sound too country, I can repeat. But please don't feel like you're interrupting at any time. Stop me, because I don't want to just sit here and be a talking head. Some people are better at that than me, but I like interaction. And the more questions, the merrier. I have put together a few slides. There's only like 5 or 6, I think. But we can get started with that. And so, yeah. Anytime, don't be afraid to ask a question. Okay. I'm more familiar with Google Meet because we're not allowed to use Zoom. So if anytime there's any technical difficulties, let me know. But here's my name, Catcuce Tiger. Of course, at Cherokee Central Schools, Cherokee High School, and within the school, I work in the high school, one of the 3 schools, and then even within that, I work within the cultural department, which houses all of our language teachers and cultural events that we put on throughout the school system, not just within the school year. We even do things in the summertime too. Oh, and also there I had put my Zalagi Dogwood on my Cherokee name there at the top. You can see, which is that word is Zutzi. which I should have said. So my name is, they call me Panther. And it's kind of coincidentally named that my last name is Tiger, because they use the same name for tiger, a panther, or cougar, whatever you want to call it, or a lion, any large cat like that here on this continent. And our language is referred to with that word. And so I was named ceremonially in the traditional way at Stomp Grounds, and that's the name that I was given. And I don't know if they did it on purpose or not, but it's kind of funny. All right, a little bit about my professional and educational background. I'm a licensed North Carolina teacher. The funny thing is I'm licensed as a social studies teacher through grades 9 through 12, because it's in the works to get language teachers a state licensure for teaching the language, which is what we do. But in the high school, they classified me through human resources the best way they could as a social studies teacher because of my history background. I'm also part of the Cherokee High School leadership team, was just appointed this fall semester. Don't hold this against me, but I'm a catamount. I went to grad school at Western and got my master's there in American history, and I focused a lot in anthropology and Cherokee history. I'm also current member of the Nugadua Academy School Board, which is where Ayla works at. My undergrad studies were at Haskell Indian Nations University. I put there, I have an AIS degree, and that's what they used to call it, but now they call it an Indigenous Studies degree. But that is actually a holdover from the boarding school, and I think it might be one of the only schools, if not the only institution, that still has the same structure from the early 1880s and a lot of the same buildings, that has actually went from a trade school, then some years later turned into a junior college, and then changed to a 4-year degree university there. And it is located in Lawrence, Kansas. And most of you guys may not know where that is, but it's right next door to Kansas University. It's about 45 minutes west of Kansas City, Kansas, or Kansas City, Missouri. And you have to be a member of a fairly recognized Native American tribe to attend that school. So that's kind of cool that I got to go to school there. And my undergrad, and also played a little football there. I'm also, some of you guys probably aren't familiar with Cherokee Preservation Foundation, but they're responsible for funding a lot of grants, not just on the Koala Boundary, but in Western North Carolina. And I'm a board member of that organization. This most recent chief, Richard Sneed, appointed me to that. And also I like to tell people that I'm a 2000 alumni of the Right Path Adult Leadership Program. And if you see there at the end, I put a word, how we refer to the program is the Yuktani, and it has a multitude of meanings, but it means to try to live in a certain way on a certain path. And so coincidentally, they named it in English the Right Path Adult Leadership Program. So those are just a few things about me that I'm kind of proud about, not trying to brag, but a lot of hard work goes into becoming a teacher like you all are learning now. Some of you guys are probably already there. Also, as Dr. Bryant mentioned, being the bicentennial of the Cherokee Syllabary or Sequoyah Syllabary. And there are some differences between a syllabary or a syllabic chart and an alphabet. Here's a little snapshot of our syllabary chart. And if you see on the top left, the character, can y'all see my cursor? Okay, cool. So this top row right here, I'll give you a little background. If you look here in English, our English vowels are A, E, I, O, and U. But in Cherokee, we pronounce these A, E, O, U, and we have a sixth vowel, which is So the way these correspond is here. If you look at this row going across the top, you have a character that looks like a capital D is pronounced A. This kind of pretty looking R is pronounced A. E, O, U, as you see. And then the columns below all those vowels, if you look, they have a consonant vowel pattern with them all. Ga, ka, ha, la, ma. We have 3 nas here, na, and then a na, and a na. Gua, or sometimes pronounced qua, We have a couple S sounds here with the sha and the s, da, ta, and so on. So a lot of people are confused by when you see these 85, 86 characters because there's so many of them, right? In the English alphabet, we only have 24. And so when you're teaching the language utilizing Sequoyah Syllabary, the kids have to be schooled and taught the different vowel sounds, and then also the pairing of the vowels and consonants together, which makes a lot of different characters. But it's kind of the strength of the writing system, because when you can utilize one character to actually provide an example of a consonant and a vowel, in my mind, it makes things a little easier. It's less writing, but at the same time, when you're teaching new learners, it's a lot more, you're learning a completely new writing system. So those are some of the difficult things about learning the writing system. But in my opinion, this is just my opinion, this is the easiest part of the language that you can learn, because you don't need any fluent speakers around. You don't need to be in a classroom. They literally, you could, if you guys are familiar with Quizlet or Quizzes or Kahoot or GimKit, any of those online learning tools, you can create flashcards with these electronically. And I think when I first started learning them, I learned them in a matter of maybe 6 to 8 weeks. And that's about the same pace that I try to teach my high school kids to learn them at, is usually by the end of the first quarter in the semester, they've hopefully mastered these characters. Not every student does that 100% of the time, but I usually try to set for about 90% or so or higher. And that's a lot of questions always pop up around the writing system, just because it's so cool. It's so unique. And as Dr. Bryant said, Sequoyah was a genius. In my opinion, he should be up there with Aristotle, with Plato, with Einstein, with Edison, with Nikola Tesla, any of those great inventors, those great scholars, great minds. He should be put in that same category when discussing just geniuses, in my opinion. I talked with Dr. Brown a little bit via email, and he had posed some questions that kind of get me primed up and get me thinking. But why is it important to preserve the language? Why does our tribe, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians, devote so much time, manpower, and funding towards these programs? And in our beliefs, our language was given to us by Unehlanahi, which is our word for the creator. We were given our traditions, our medicine, our language, and it is our job as Cherokee people to carry these on. And in some people's minds, oftentimes in the minds of traditionalists, if you're not preserving the language, you're not preserving your identity. You're not preserving who you are. So it's one of the things that makes us who we are. And the greatest view that it gives for non-Cherokee people that are learning the language is it teaches how fluent speakers, how Cherokee-minded people view the world. It's our perspective into the world. It's our lens. And so things are worded differently than English and oftentimes other languages. But when you look at other native languages, there are some similarities. So I put kind of a little, not a pros and cons here, but first language speakers versus second language speakers. And what I mean when I refer to first language speakers are people who just grew up hearing the language from birth, and without even trying to learn, they learned the language. It's just like you all most likely learned English. You know, you learn by being around it, you learn by living it. And then another category of second language learners. So under that, I put kind of some talking points of the reason we want to preserve this language. And for fluent speakers, they were born into Cherokee speaking families and communities. But some of the reasons why we don't have as many speakers in our communities nowadays is some people did not teach their children. And if they married not only another Cherokee or maybe a non-Indian, a non-Cherokee person or a person from another tribe possibly, sometimes there's that language barrier. And so lack of communication, the one common thread they had was English. And so sometimes they often rely more on English, and then kind of Cherokee took a back seat. There's also effects from boarding schools, and also just changing with the times with intermarrying, marriage, Native peoples being dispersed, outing programs, just assimilation tactics and colonization efforts by the United States federal government has contributed to the loss of language. Now, I'm not the type that likes to dwell on this. I know this, it's fact. I know a lot of people talk about it, and it's very important. But at the same times, too, I like to focus more on resiliency of Native peoples and the people who have kept things going. And that's why I'm here today, and that's why I'm speaking to you today, because those same people that were oppressed, they were not just victims, they're survivors. And I don't like to take the victim mentality with anything. And so all peoples have faced hard times, and all peoples that are still around have persevered. But that is definitely, that federal policy assimilation was very effective in accomplishing a lot of what it set out to do. And then also with a lot of our language loss nowadays is just health and age of our speakers. Most of our speakers are over the age of 60, have just, you know, the normal healthcare issues that most 60, 70-year-old Americans have. But if you look into any studies of disease, that Native people's diabetes rates, heart disease, cancer, everything is higher for Native people than any other race on this continent. And it's not, I don't bring that point up to say, oh, we have it worse than anyone else. And it's not who has it the worst and all that, but it has a lot to do with diets and just Western society. Us Native peoples, it's taken a long time for our bodies to adjust to different diets. And of course, people overindulge. But that's one of the reasons that we're dealing with our language loss now. And some of the tough stuff with second language learning is it's hard to be fully immersed in the language anymore. Oftentimes when you hear people want to learn Spanish, they do a study abroad and go somewhere in Central America or possibly overseas to Spain, right? And this is hard to do oftentimes for a lot of people, even in our home communities. It does happen. There's a language class going on right now that I missed out on that I'll be able to attend next week. But where people do gather with fluent speakers and just eat and just talk and just learn and share. And something as a second language learner myself, if you look here at the second bullet point, I put learning to teach, because just because you're a speaker or just because you're knowledgeable with the language does not make you a good teacher or an effective teacher, right? We all have those teachers growing up that maybe could have did things a little better to help individualize lessons for your deficiencies that you might have or weaknesses to help you grow as a learner. And if we don't keep that in mind with our differentiation when we're creating lessons with the language, it's the same as any other class or topic that you're going to cover in school. If the teachers aren't trained, if they aren't highly responsible and organized, it may not be a very effective class. So that's something I like to keep in mind. And we do have a lot of resources in our communities. And I say communities because we have smaller communities within our broader, with our tribe, depending on where you live. But there are oftentimes language classes. A lot of times during COVID, we started a lot of these Zoom and Google Meet classes with people all over the country, Oklahoma, and just even here on the boundary, because we didn't want to take the risk of getting some of our elders sick. So we chose to stay remote. I myself have taught some free community classes to learn the syllabary, like a 6 to 8 week class. And, you know, it's pretty intensive. We meet once a week, but there's a lot of efforts that a lot of people are doing to try to teach the language and do their part. And I just want to mention Cherokee High School and the cultural department is kind of where I come in to being a language teacher. I did some things before I had credentials, just from things I had learned from being around people. And I put a flyer out, me and a friend, to start some classes, kind of some grassroots stuff. And I'll be danged if a lot of people, the class didn't fill up. I think we took 20 that first time, and it filled up the first day or two that we advertised in the paper. And, you know, said maybe we're onto something here. And people want to learn, people are hungry. If at any time, I can't see my chat while this PowerPoint is running. So Dr. Brown, at any time, if there's a question that pops up, don't be afraid to just go ahead and ask. And some of the other things that Dr. Bryant had mentioned is what works in a classroom, what's effective teaching strategies for myself. We talked a little bit about syllabary, but I haven't touched on phonetics yet. And also challenges to teaching any foreign language to teenagers. That's kind of where my niche is. That's where I fit in right now. In a few years, I might teach somewhere else in our department or a different area. I don't know. Things are oftentimes fluid in school systems, and you kind of go where you're needed. And I will talk about the classes I do teach, but I want to talk a little bit about classroom experience. And I learned right away within the first couple of days of what works in the classroom and what doesn't. And you can tell oftentimes by body language, eye contact, posture. There's all kinds of things that kids get distracted by these days. And some of you college students aren't much different. I myself, I'm 38 years old. So when I was in high school, some kids were getting cell phones, but I didn't have one. I didn't get one until I went off to college, and my mom wanted to be able to talk to me without me having to go to a payphone. So I got a cell phone. But, you know, there's a lot of challenges today. And like I said, it's not just with the language. It's in teaching any discipline to high school kids comes with a specific set of challenges. But I feel like our kids and our community nourish the language and try to be proactive as we can with it. And especially within my school system, I couldn't have better administrators or a superintendent who really, really do care about our language program and all facets of it. And they were willing to do just about all that they can do to help assist. Now, they say, well, I can't teach it, but I'll give you the tools and whatever you need. And so being a teacher, a lot of you will learn that are wanting to teach or might be doing student teaching now. Oftentimes you go in a classroom with a lack of resources. And I did watch Mrs. Cruz, her talk, and she spoke a little bit about, not having resources in certain areas and working for the tribe here for the language program. We are separate from Nugadu Academy, but we work together because we're working towards the same goal. But we are fortunate to have electronics. But at the same time, too, with our print materials, just about anything I have in my class, I've made myself, worksheets and notes and everything I type up. So that's just part of I don't know any different. I've never been given a workbook or a textbook and said, here, this is how you teach the culture and the language, because if you learn anything about language or culture, you don't learn it in classrooms. So it's kind of hard taking things life ways and transform them into a classroom and make it accessible and to get kids to learn, because it's not the way traditionally that we learn. And I kind of jokingly put that foreign language in there because as Native tribes have fought for sovereignty, we were ruled by the government as domestic dependent nations. And then the first legal jargon that the Cherokee Nation had written back in the 1800s was they said they were a foreign nation because how they were treated. I don't think they really believed that, but that was just the legal jargon that they used in their treaty and petitioning to the United States Supreme Court. So we won't get into all that, but Cherokee people and all Native people were seen as domestic, but also dependent nations with the government. And so that's a whole nother time and place when we get into treaty rights and sovereignty. And I guess today is a good day for Indigenous Peoples Day and a good topic to discuss, but I want to try to stay focused on point here. And so when I talked about things that do work, things that I learned right away is myself. I enjoy active learning. And what I mean by that is just hands-on and actually trying to figure things out yourself. If I just give a word list to kids and I show them how to conjugate a verb or two, and I give them 6 to 10 sentences and say, this is how you say, I want to go to the store. You would say, or I need to go to the restroom. I could write these out and they would memorize those phrases, but they wouldn't really learn them. They wouldn't know what the words mean per se. So you got to dive deeper into it and get kids to really use their brain. Your brain's a muscle. It needs to be worked out. And language learning definitely does that. I threw a couple keywords in there like scaffolding. I know you guys have heard that, and spiraling your lessons and lesson plans. But I really do believe in that. And through my classes and attaining a license, I really took to heart the process of I do something to the kids, I demonstrate, and then we do that activity together. And then when it comes time to assess, or later on in the day, informal or formal assessments, depending on what you're trying to do, you let them do it and demonstrate to you that they have comprehension and understanding of it. And, you know, you can get really deep into education and the pedagogy and what methods work. And one psychologist believes this, and somebody says this is biological, and someone says, you know, this is their environment affects it more. It all comes down to pushing kids to think, to demonstrate what you want them to do, and then do it as together and as a whole, and then independently let them work on their own and figure things out themselves that they may not completely understand. But once they make a mistake or two and see what they did wrong, or see the possibly conjugating a verb wrong, they put a wrong suffix on it, and you pointed out why, and that's the way growth happens. I love that acronym of FAIL. They say fail, first attempt in learning, and I really do believe in that. And without that failure, without doing something maybe not necessarily wrong, but just in a different way, and then learning why the way you say things a certain way with the language is very, very important. And one of the most important things with kids is getting them to reinforce the cultural values with the language. Not only are you teaching them to speak words and what they mean, but you're teaching them a mindset. And that's really hard to do. It's very, very hard to do. And I don't know if a lot of other languages do that, but I do know with native languages, and in particular with Cherokee, with my learning, you have to think as a Cherokee speaker or a Cherokee person was and would when you're using the language. And it just makes things easier. And until you get that, things oftentimes don't make a lot of sense. You might be able to speak quite a bit and understand, but once you start translating words and thinking how a speaker would say it, it's not as tough as it once was once you take that big monumental step. Sometimes it happens a year into people's learning. Sometimes it takes people 10 years to understand that. But you really have to think as a Cherokee person. And also when I say that I do, we do, you do, I'm real big into group activities. Those kids who are very confident and outgoing, it oftentimes helps them to work in a group and to kind of demonstrate to their classmates, because it gives them a sense of pride and they're proud of what they know and what they can share. And so that's just very, very important in the classroom, I feel. And also with my spiraling my lessons, I'll teach something the first week of school, and we will continually visit that throughout the semester. And through our K through 12 program and even pre-K, we really walk the walk with that. And we really enforce that. And a lot of people say, well, why are you still covering some of that stuff? They know how to say that. It's like, well, we put different tools out there. We put a screwdriver, a hammer, some nails, a power drill, a measuring tape, and different things. And as they go, they pick these things up along the way, and they're able to really build something longer down the road. But they're not just going to be able to take that hammer and nails and build a lot of stuff. They're going to be able to do a little bit. But I'm trying to use that analogy, and I hope that makes sense. And also, reinforcement of cultural values is big on identity. Whether you're teaching Native kids or an inner city group of African Americans, or maybe you're teaching in a middle class neighborhood in California with a high Latino population, kids are searching for their identity. Sometimes kids grow up with a strong roots in identity, who they are, their language, their culture, what it means to be Cherokee, what it means to be Mexican American, what it means to be African American or Caucasian, whatever it may be in their specific community. But all teenagers, I think, struggle with identity. And I think the culture is a great way to help kids out along the way, to be not only know who they are, find out who they are, but to be proud of it. Because you can't help the way you're born and the color in or the community you grew up in, but hopefully you can learn to be proud of that. And here I just put a small little phrase, and it just says "Doheli," and that is just the way that we would ask someone, "What do you think?" Maybe we're talking about a certain topic. I might say "Doheli," like, "What do you think?" So at this time, I know we have a good 20, 30 minutes still. But I kind of wanted to get through my slides, and we can go back and visit anything that you guys might have questions about, because I want you guys to have the time to ask those questions. Let me check the chat here, make sure I didn't miss anything. Apologize about that puppy. Well, I'm so unfamiliar with Zoom these days. I apologize, guys. Here we go. Okay, there's nothing in the chat, so that's okay. Dr. Brian, is there anything you want me to touch on? I mean, I'm going to continue talking, but did anything trigger anything that I said for you or prompt you maybe?
Oh yeah, I loved all of that. That was great. I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about the students themselves, how they approach it. And I know one of the things that Ayla talked about, and one of the things that a lot of my students have talked about, is kind of that sense of pressure, that feeling of responsibility, that it's not, you're not taking French or Spanish or German, you're taking a language that is in many ways threatened. And so I wonder if you could tell us about how your students approach the class and what it's like to work with them in your classrooms.
So we have all kinds of different students. The vast majority of our students are enrolled members of the Eastern Band, but we do have students who are not enrolled members. They might be members of another tribe. They may be just non-Indians in general, because at Cherokee Central Schools, where we're a federally funded school under the Bureau of Indian Education, we receive grant funding, and our tribe also provides us funding as well that matches what the government provides. And so we take all kids, doesn't matter race, creed, or whatever. But the attitude towards my class, oftentimes kids see me in the community, or they might see me as someone who knows more than them. But I try to just always make kids feel comfortable the first day in my class, that I'm very relaxed, I'm very laid back, but I am very passionate and I am very serious about what I do, because without that, there's no weight to what you say. And you have to, in my opinion, to learn the language and to be a Cherokee person, you have to live it. I could talk about it all day long, but if I'm not doing it, it doesn't have a lot of weight with our people, because we are the type of people that would respond more from actions as opposed to just someone who's just a talking head. But kids come in at all different levels of knowledge. Some kids are very confident because they come from homes that are rich in speaking, rich in cultural traditions. And we have some kids who might be a cousin to one of those kids, grow up in the same family, but just maybe doesn't take to language learning. And they come in very insecure. Even though they might have had the same education, some kids, just language learning is tough for some people. Oftentimes we have kids who transfer from other public schools in the area in Swain County or Jackson County or Macon County or Haywood County, and they've never taken a Cherokee language class before. And they're putting in my classroom, placed in my classroom with kids who are advanced and been doing it for 10, 12 years. Because at our school, at Cherokee Central Schools, to graduate from high school, you have to pass our Cherokee Language 1 class. It's a graduation requirement. And we do offer an immersion class. That's an elective. We offer a Cherokee 2 advanced class, which is also an elective. And that's where we mainly focus on the syllabary. And then also this semester, I was asked to start teaching a Cherokee history class, which is another elective course within the high school. So I'm teaching 3 different classes right now, 3 different curriculums. And the good thing is I helped to build those curriculums that I'm working with. So even before I really knew what I was doing, oftentimes you're kind of just asked to shoulder a load because you kind of sign up for that when you become a language teacher, that there's a lot of things that aren't necessarily in your job description, that you have to do. And that's just being an educator in general. You're going to do a lot outside of your scope as a teacher. You're a psychologist, you're a date. When they're dating, they're looking for advice. When they're gossiping with each other, when they're looking to go to the military or go to college, you're doing it all. Because oftentimes as educators, we have kids for a small portion of their life, but oftentimes are blamed or shoulder the weight of how the kids perform the rest of their life. So that's something very important that I've always thought of as an educator as well. We only have a small window with these kids, and you can either be very influential in a positive way, or they will remember you for not really doing much for them. And, as kids, we all have those teachers we can look back. I have a math teacher that was really great, and I remember her name, and I remember her classroom, and I remember the sign on her door and what it said. And I have other teachers, I can't remember their names, and I don't remember much about their class because they didn't reach me. Not that they weren't good teachers or good educators, but they just didn't reach me. So all different levels of class, but I think as a whole, kids want to learn and they're hungry, but oftentimes they just don't know how to start. That's like with anything, doing something new, something maybe that's a little new to you. Oftentimes we fear those things, but once they get over that, and in a roundabout way, I kind of just force them to talk and put them in situations that encourages it, and of course that they're comfortable. I don't just wave a stick at them and tell them, reverse colonization. We joke about that in my class sometimes with our kids, and they say, "God, are you going to beat us for not speaking the language?" But jokingly, and sense of humor is a big part of it. I'm glad I said that joke because indigenous kids and indigenous people in general oftentimes have I'm learning a different sense of humor than some people are used to, and a different level of sarcasm, and not necessarily in a smarty way, but just a different type of sense of humor. And some people who are outsiders to the community, they're like, man, they're giving that guy a hard time. And oftentimes if people aren't giving you a hard time, it doesn't mean they really don't like you, or maybe they're really not close to you, because if people aren't kind of poking at you and messing with you, and I'm not saying bullying, but it's just a different type of sense of humor that some people aren't used to.
In my first year, Dr. Forrest told me, if we're not making fun of you, we don't like you.
Yeah, and she knows because she's been there her whole life, and her dad worked nothing but with Cherokee people for a long time, and she pretty much is one of us. So
let's see, we do have in the chat here.
Okay. And I apologize. I've got a Pomeranian in the background, and he's 16 years old, so he kind of barks when he wants to.
So Jordan Taylor asked if you have any advice about how they can avoid being talking heads, especially if they aren't allowed to teach about what's going on around them or what they're living. How can they still make it mean something?
I've always found with teachers, just be real with the kids. And especially, I know a lot of you guys are probably elementary ed and maybe middle school, but even them little ones, they know when you're having a bad day. They know when something's off with you just by being, they're reading you the minute you walk into school, and they're looking at how you're dressed and if your hair's combed, and they're kind of judging you before you realize it. But just be real with them, even with the little ones. When they ask a question, do your best to answer it as honestly as you can. And if you tell them you're going to do something, you better stand behind it, because a lot of times all we have is our credibility. And if you're always saying you're going to give them a snack party if they do great on that test, well, you better have the money to buy them those snacks when they do good on that test, because they will work towards it. I've just always tried to be down to earth, just be myself. As a teacher, and it served me pretty well. Of course, I have made kids mad at times, but I tell them too, I said, I'm not here to be your friend, I'm here to teach you. And sometimes you do have to take that stern line with them and let them know that, this is class and this just isn't fun time. But making those real connections, I feel very fortunate because it's lucky for me because I live in this community. I see these kids at the gas station. I see them working at grocery stores and fast food restaurants. I see them a lot of times outside of school because some of them are family members. Or I have a little cousin that I teach in class and he brings his friends over to a family barbecue. So these kids, they know me, they see me, and they know I'm in the same boat with them working towards the same thing. So I feel fortunate to oftentimes, have great support from student body. And I also hear them out. When you really ask them how their day is, you better be ready because they might unload on you. Oh, I got in a fight with my boyfriend and my mom's going to take my car because I stayed out too late the other night and my phone is cracked. And, even though you might have a lot of work to do at that time, take the time and to hear them out and let them know that their opinion does matter. Because oftentimes kids at school are just told to get to work, do your work, turn it in, do this, do that. And they don't have a lot of equal or level communication with some teachers at times. So the more you can talk to them and just help them understand where you come from, introduce yourself, tell them where you grew up, what it was like at your high school, if you didn't go to the school you're teaching at, or, just anything about those outside activities and communities. They're always open to hear it because it expands their experiences and it makes them feel like they know you better. And so as Native people, we kind of do that in general. When you meet someone, the first thing they're going to ask you probably is, who's your mom, or what's your clan, or where were you raised, or who are your people, in a roundabout way, one of those 3 to 4 questions. So, and that just goes back to, if they knew my grandma, whether they knew me or not, or the first time we've met, they feel that connection. And they're like, oh, that's so-and-so's grandson. I know him. So, I have that going for me as well. But it does take time to build those relationships. And some kids, it doesn't happen very easily. You have to work for it. I've had a kid in my class before that was kind of literally a selective mute. And literally the last week of class, the student started talking to me and interacting and just kind of came around. And sometimes you never know. It might happen 2 weeks into school. It might happen the last week of school. Hopefully it's halfway through the semester at least that you're building that relationship. And some kids are harder to reach than others, because of a multitude of reasons. But you just have to always make yourself available to them. And it's a service. You're there to provide help and education to those kids. And that's your number one priority, is keeping them safe, making them feel comfortable. And if they're not worrying about any of that other stuff, they're going to learn.
So what I'd like to do then is go ahead and open up. If anybody has questions, you don't have to put it in the chat. Feel free to just speak up. So anybody have a question? Because I don't want to hog all the time. So does anybody have a question that you'd like to ask, or a comment for Mr. Tiger? Let's see who we have. I want to make sure everybody has a chance. One question I had that, and again, y'all don't let me take up all the time, so jump in at any time. But given the difference of the approach, the fact that now you have to take Cherokee to graduate, the fact that you talked about the support that you get from the administration and the support that you have from the folks that you work with, I wonder what you hear from the elders, from the folks who maybe would have loved to be able to have these opportunities and would have loved to be supported, but some of whom may have been physically or emotionally abused for the language, or at a bare minimum, probably didn't get a lot of support for speaking it or learning it. I wonder what interactions you have and what you're able to hear from the elders.
So I've had all kinds of different experiences with people. I have family members, of course, both of my grandmothers, and all four of my grandparents went to Cherokee boarding school here. We were fortunate for the fact that it was here on our boundary, on our land, the school, but sometimes it might make it tougher being there in your home country, on your land, and being subjected to some of that rule. with the interactions I've had with elders, I've had elders say they'll just come up to me and start talking, and they'll want to test me. I can tell they're testing me. They'll ask me something they may not think I know, or I had one parent who was an elder in the community, and I had, greeted him when I saw him in public, and he just started, how would you say this? How would you say this? How would you say it's blah, 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 blah? And I just did my best that I could. And I told him that I'm still a language learner. I said, that I'm just learning the language. I said, but I don't ever, that's not a negative thing to me. When someone tells me, oh, I'm just learning the language, I take it as a point of pride and point of emphasis that I'm not trying to say I know it all. I know I'm not a fluent speaker, but I am very dedicated at what I do, and I work very hard at what I do all the time. And so I like that to be tested. Also, the reason I have the job I do is Miss Laura Penix. She's the director of cultural programs. She started the language program there at Cherokee Central Schools. And when she heard that I was doing a lot of these community classes and I was still in grad school, she approached me. She was like, you need to come work at the school. How do you feel about teaching? And I was like, I don't want to teach. I definitely don't want to work with high school kids. I'll tell you that. Well, 2 years later, I don't know if she used some Indian medicine on me or something, but I was there teaching for her and learning from her. And I'm very fortunate for that because she's a very strong, fluent speaker, first language speaker, and just a great teacher as well. So, I've had all kinds of different, sometimes people said, why do you teach? You don't speak. And I was like, well, I'm learning. And, you can't let the naysayers get you down. And not everyone's always congratulatory. Not everyone is always have your back. They just, for whatever reason, but I've never been the type of individual to really care about that because it just slowed me down. I don't have the time for that. So, and it took me time to learn that too, that it doesn't matter what people think or the gaps. I try to focus on the positives as opposed to the things that I don't do well. I try to work on those, but at the same time too, I have confidence in what I do know and what I have learned over the years. And I learned a large part, just by trying, putting yourself out there, learning guitar, learning how to work on a lawnmower. Anything new you try to do is going to take time, and the more time and focus you put into it, the better at it you're going to be. So I just take that approach with everything.
Thank you. We got a great question from Grace. She's asking for folks, most of these students will probably teach, in a non-native setting. And so her question is, what can they do in their own classes to help promote and teach the Cherokee language and the Cherokee culture, maybe in a non-native setting?
So there's a lot of internet resources. There's a lot of good YouTube stuff, but you do have to be careful to find good, credible sources on YouTube, because there are some people that will present themselves as Cherokee people or Cherokee speakers or knowledgeable in Cherokee history and culture, and they're really, that's false oftentimes. But there are a lot of great resources. Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma puts out a lot of great stuff. Even the Eastern Band here puts out a lot of good stuff, a lot of good videos. But I try to, as an educator, I don't just focus on my kids, because growing up, my dad, he did a lot of community outreach for non-Indigenous communities, and would teach them about cultural sensitivities and what we would call things. Because, there's always the stereotypes that Hollywood has helped portray about teepees and buffalo and feathered hairdresses, and not every Native people does that. But what you can do as an educator is, just like they say about multicultural classrooms, is do your research. If you have a student that has that background, maybe you have a student from Nigeria, Google Nigeria, YouTube something about Nigeria, and you'll be surprised what you can find in good, authentic material. But just like with Native American history, often what we see in textbooks we're learning now is not very accurate. And a lot of us have known that for a long time, and things seem kind of funny, like, why are they teaching it that way? But you don't really question it, because if it's in a book, it's official. But that's something that all Indigenous people should do it. And I hope things like this, that this talking session right here, you don't have to be just a Native person to teach Native history or to have a good understanding of Native peoples, but it does help to do your research, read a book. There's a lot of great seminars and lectures from people that are way more knowledgeable than me, that are great professors, that have a lot of information to give, and it's free on the web. There's a lot of great resources. I should have put together a bibliography of resources and internet links. I can try to do that to Dr. Bryant, and just some things I like to use, some online dictionaries, RCO app that we do through the school system as well. I'm kicking myself for spending some time to talk about that. But there's all kinds of stuff. But just like with anything, with any multicultural approach to a classroom, do your research. And if you have a teaching in a population that's highly Latino, really focus on that when that comes around, or when you choose to, and just try to incorporate your classroom welcoming to everyone. Because like at my school, it's mainly Indigenous or Cherokee people. So I'm also biased, and I need to do a better job of, talking about a multicultural approach, but I'm kind of paid to have a narrow mind with my culture, because that's my focus. So it's kind of a different approach there that I take than most people. But just educate yourself and be your own advocate for your language learning and history and any of that stuff. There's so much out there to learn, and if you can really make those connections with kids, they'll be like, hey, they know a little bit about who I am. I really like that teacher, and it goes a long way.
Thank you. I know we're getting close to our time here. I guess one thing I wanted to ask is, one of the things that always kind of blows me away about Sequoyah is how for 20 years, 25 years, the missionaries had always told the Cherokee people, because you don't have a written language, that's our proof that you're uncivilized. That's our proof that you're inferior. We can write our information down and you can't. And then when Sequoyah comes around and does what he does, he just takes that argument away. And the Cherokee people at the time, John Ross, Elias Boudinot, John Ridge, they got that. They understood that now that argument that this is our proof that you are somehow lesser, it was gone. Sequoyah took that away. So I guess for the future teachers, but also for the other folks who are with us tonight, what do you want us to know about Sequoyah, the man, but also, the symbol for Cherokee people?
Our writing system is a point of pride and a point of emphasis with our language. We're special. We're very fortunate to have a written language and to have someone like Sequoyah, because he had naysayers. His own people they thought he was doing bad medicine or what, things that were very taboo, I guess you could say, to explain it to non-Cherokee people, what we might call conjuring, or bad, what do they call it, like bad voodoo or witch medicine or something. They thought he was trying to work on people and do bad things, because he was trying to take words and transform to paper, and it just wasn't a Cherokee thing to do. But it couldn't be more of a Cherokee thing to do at the same time, to fighting resistance and to holding on to what they needed to survive moving forward as progressive Native people, because Cherokee people have always been very progressive, have always put a high emphasis on education, while still maintaining that core sense of being Cherokee, because oftentimes things get lost in the shuffle about progressive and five civilized tribes, like, oh, they just threw their traditions in the back seat and they started dressing like non-Indians, they started learning like non-Indians, they picked up Christianity and left their tribal spirituality behind, which isn't always the case. But Sequoyah is a prime example of how intelligent not just Cherokee but Indigenous people are. Very, very creative, deep thinker. And I heard a story about one time he came home and there was a stick, a big pole in the ground in his yard, and he had gotten home and there was some men there. And they said, "What's that for?" And they said, we're going to put your head on that if you continue doing what you're doing," because they thought he was trying to do bad things. Well, he persisted. And even oftentimes I've heard stories of his wife destroying some of his stuff a couple of times, things that he had come up with. And that's one of the sad things. And I think there's some people working on it now, but to provide some more history and more background about who he really was as an individual, because I can't think of a person, not just a Cherokee person, but a people in this country that has been overlooked more and that we could learn more than Sequoyah. He's just been not given the attention and the point of emphasis that he should be from what he did in his lifetime. Because I won't ever be able to say I created a written language, nor do I have the brain power to do such. But I do teach what he created, and I have learned the syllabary, and I know them frontwards and backwards. But it does make learning the language funner, and it's just it's fun as it is. But when you learn that other asset, another tool, like when you're able to have a bookmark here that has syllabary, I don't know if you can see it. Syllabary, you can't see it, but it's got syllabary written on here. It's a bookmark from one of my 5-year-old, I believe. And it's got the months on here. But, it's just another thing of being able to claim who you are and being proud of who you are and being grateful. And I see I'm 2 minutes over.
Hey, that's no problem at all. Thank you so much. I want to give folks a chance before we sign off for the night. I know we don't want to keep Mr. Tiger too long, but does anybody have a last minute question or a comment or anything you'd like to ask? I want to make sure everybody gets the opportunity. All right, everybody. Well, thanks, Mr. Tiger. Thank you so much for your time. I just can't thank you enough. This was wonderful. I know the information was great for my future teachers, and we had a lot of folks, in here. We're getting a lot of thank yous in the chat here. I hope you can see them. A lot of folks really thanking you. I think I see some Cherokee in one of the things.
I see Cully, or
yeah.
I call him Cully, call him the raccoon.
So we really, really appreciate it. We got to all learn a great deal. And I think it's important, for us to be able to hear this. And I think for my teachers, for the future teachers out there, whether you're Native or not right now, I think there's so much history that's being lost. There's so much that we're not talking about right now. There's so much censorship, going on that's telling people what they're allowed to talk about and they're not allowed to talk about in history classes. So
cancel culture.
It's really scary.
That's one last thing I always tell my kids is be proud of who you are. It doesn't matter if you're Cherokee or Choctaw or Irish or Italian. Be proud of who you are, learn who you are, and honor your ancestors. Teach the things they teach you. If you know a recipe your grandma cooked, well, you better teach it to your kids and anyone who likes that dish. Be proud of who you are, and everyone has culture if you just look for it. That's right. I can't say it better. So thank you so much. This has been wonderful. And everybody, if you can, again, November the 10th, we'll have Mr. Standing Deer, and it'll be a Zoom link as well. So you can just check the Gadugi website or the Facebook page, or look for the announcements. But Mr. Tiger, once again, thank you so much. This has been absolutely great. I really appreciate your time. And thanks everybody for coming out tonight. I appreciate you all and your time. Thank you, sir. Bye-bye, everybody.